All right, everybody, welcome back to another exciting interview we have. Today we have an awesome person who is a great friend. I've known him for a long, long time. He's a pioneer in the field of lifestyle medicine. His own journey is remarkable. I can't wait to talk to you, Steve, about your own personal journey, what you're doing these days. So I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Steve Lawenda. Steve, let me start off by asking you, if you don't mind, just saying a little bit about who you are, what you do, and more importantly, what really got you into this concept of eating healthier?
Sure. And I want to, first of all, I want to thank you, Sean. I appreciate so much of what you've done in the field of lifestyle medicine and nutrition. And I just want to say, too, I may have shared this with you before, but I just want to compliment you. When you give presentations, when you explain nutrition and you explain studies, you do it in such a brilliant way. You make it all sound so simple. And I think so many people appreciate that. No, because, studies can be complex, especially for those medical people who don't typically read a lot of studies, especially nutrition studies. And so nutrition studies are a little challenging to interpret sometimes because of so many limitations, and you do an excellent job. And so I just want to thank you for that and for all you do in this field and for doing this. And I'm honored to be speaking with you today and honored to call you a friend as well. And so I just appreciate you and I'm very grateful. So I'm Sean, as you know, I'm a primary care physician. So, I mostly treat adults. I'm family medicine, and we don't really see many kids these days because they generally go to pediatrics. But I do see people, for the most part, across most of the lifespan. And of course, I've seen a lot of suffering in my patients, and that has really made me wonder if there's a better way, if all this suffering is really quote unquote normal and expected, or whether it can be prevented, whether it can be even reversed to an extent. And but my journey and the reason I got interested in lifestyle medicine and nutrition is actually mainly a personal one, at least at the core. And so if you don't mind, I can share that my
Please.
personal journey. So Sean, I was born to a mother who, she grew up in a family where the family business was a mom and pop fast food restaurant, and so my mother's side of that, I mean, I love my family, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to criticize them, I love them with all my heart. But in terms of food, I grew up, again, my mother's side just had a love for, like, sugary, greasy, salty food, fast food. And food was everything. When I say everything, when we were celebrating something, when we were sad, every time we got together, it's food, 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 and it's always rich food. And then on my father's side, you won't believe this, honestly, this story is kind of like, I don't know, what are the odds of this? But my father, when he grew up, his family business was a family bakery. So, and when I say bakery, I don't mean whole grain, 100% organic, earthy bread. I mean pastries and, everything, cake and donuts and all kinds of sugary, greasy pastries, and you name it, they made it. And so that side of the family especially loved pastries and all that kind of thing, that genre. And so you can imagine, growing up with both of these parents. I mean, again, they're the most loving parents. But I just didn't grow up with much knowledge around healthy eating. And I didn't grow up with parents who were examples of that. And my father, well, actually, I'll say more about him in a moment. But I guess I'll just reflect back on my own sort of health. So growing up, I struggled with my weight. You can probably imagine why, like, given what I just shared with you. I struggled with my weight. And I remember my mom actually took me to a nutritionist when I was young. And the nutritionist would tell me that basically, kind of like moderation and portion control. She would say, because I love Mexican food, my family would go often to Mexican restaurants, and the dietitian or nutritionist would tell me, Steve, why don't you, when you eat the chips at the Mexican restaurant, just count 10 chips and stop there. And I remember how hard that was, Sean, and looking back, I realize now that, these ultra processed foods are so addictive. And, the foods are made with a certain amount of sugar, fat, and salt. They're made to be a certain texture. And all of this is down to a science to get us hooked And addicted because the more we're addicted, the more we buy, it's better business. And so it's a good business model. It makes a lot of sense. And I don't think these companies are out there to cause harm. They're in this to make money, and they realize, hey, it's our responsibility. But nonetheless, I was misguided early on in life by this message of portion control and moderation. And I really struggled. I did a lot of yo-yoing up and down with my weight, and it really affected me. It affected my self-esteem, growing up. And I was able to get my weight down at times, but it was through pretty extreme measures, Sean. It was, there were times where I literally did skip meals because I just knew that, oh my gosh, if I eat this meal, I'm going to take in so many calories. I'll just skip. And I was doing I tried to, I've always loved the game of basketball. And in high school, I really wanted to be on the basketball team. So I would do, honestly, an extreme amount. I want to say extreme. I don't mean to the point of clinically, clinically excessive, but I would literally exercise probably 2 or 3 hours every day. And, again, trying to be extra careful with what I was eating. And I was able to get my weight down to actually a pretty healthy weight, but it didn't last long, Sean, because these were not sustainable. 2 or 3 hours a day of exercise. Even though it sounds great, it's not practical to sustain. Half an hour, a lot of people struggle to get a half an hour. So I wasn't able to continue that. And my eating habits, because I loved all this rich food growing up, and all I really knew was moderation and portion control. I struggled. I gained weight in college. I gained weight in medical school. And I just continued to gain. I would have times where there was one period of time, it was about 9-10 years ago, where I actually had an app on my smartphone, and I was tracking literally everything I was eating. But it was very tedious, and it drove me crazy. Even though it was helping in the short term, I was losing weight. It drove me absolutely insane to be tracking everything, to be measuring everything. And the other thing that drove me insane was that, there would be times where at the end of the day, go, oh my gosh, I've already eaten all my daily calorie allotment. And so, but I'm hungry. And there's something in front of me, my family's eating, and I see things I want to eat, and I have these cravings because I never, when you're still eating all these ultra processed foods, even though you're tracking them, it does nothing tracking them doesn't help with the craving. So boy, did I struggle. And I can show you a picture. I don't think you knew me back then, Sean, but if you don't mind, I can share my screen and
please, yeah,
show you a picture of what let's see.
I see.
Okay. Well, here you see. Do you see me?
Yeah.
So there I was this is about 10 years ago, Sean. And the other thing I wanted to share, let me, I guess I'll stay on this for a moment because I want to show you something else, Sean. Because my father, as I was struggling with my weight, my father had type 2 diabetes. He had a heart attack when I was only 13. He survived, but I had fear that I would lose my father. And he went on to have heart bypass surgery, cabbage, a few years after that. Even though he'd quit smoking, obviously it wasn't only the smoking, it was the food as well. He went on to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and he suffered multiple complications of diabetes. But there was one complication that he suffered, Sean, that changed my whole family's outlook and trajectory of really, just our whole quality of life and everything to do with our family. To be honest, it had a ripple effect, and it really deeply affected me. And that was that my father ended up getting diabetic gangrene and losing first one of his legs. And I'm going to show a picture for those. Hopefully a lot of medical people are watching, so we've seen pictures like this, but I'm just warning people, it's a graphic image. So I'm giving that warning. But this was his foot, Sean, before they had to amputate. And it's excuse the French, it's nasty. You can imagine, here I am. At the time I saw my dad going through this, I didn't know much about nutrition. I was struggling with my own weight. So seeing him suffer with this not only affected me because this is my father, and also I'm a doctor, by the way, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how is this happening to my father? I'm a doctor. He shouldn't, I should protect him. I'm a doctor. But I realized though, Sean, that it was, even though my dad was taking all the medications prescribed to him, and he was, I would say, a pretty good patient. Was he perfect? No, but he basically followed all the direction he was given. These things still happened to him, and they happened to him really because of his lifestyle. My father, unfortunately, and many patients, especially as a primary care doctor, I see this all the time. many patients feel that their medications are going to take care of their problems, and they don't address. In fact, to some extent, I would say that the medications, in some cases, even though, of course, I prescribe medications, Sean, and I believe that they help. Of course, they help, but sometimes there can be. When I say adverse effects, we know about side effects, but there's one adverse effect. In the case of my father, for example, he would literally be sitting with a pastry. Remember, he grew up, the family business was a bakery. He never really gave up his pastries. He'd be sitting with a pastry, and we would say, "Dad, what are you doing? You're eating this pastry. You have diabetes. You have all these complications." He'd say, "Don't worry. I can increase my insulin if I need to." And he always felt that his medications would cover him, and almost that the medications justified his continuing this lifestyle, the poor lifestyle choices. Anyway, so my dad lost his leg, and as he was recovering, and by the way, before my dad lost his leg, Sean, he was functional. I mean, he had many medical issues, but he was functional to the point he was walking, driving. He had a job. He actually enjoyed his job, was happy, and he just became a grandfather. Our daughter, my wife and I, had a daughter, and our daughter, or Gabby, was his first grandchild. Gabby was just a baby when this was happening, and my dad was looking forward to becoming a grandpa and enjoying many, many years of quality time, as a grandfather. And this is the way that this chapter of his life begins, tragically. And as my father's learning to recover with one leg, and they gave him, of course, a prosthesis for the BKA, the below the knee, he unfortunately develops gangrene in the good foot, the remaining foot. And my father had to lose the other leg. My father lost both of his legs, Sean, in the span of less than 1 year. And as my daughter and his first grandchild was learning to walk, my father lost the ability to walk. So he could never actually do hardly anything that normal grandparents do, with their grandchildren. Couldn't watch her, couldn't take her anywhere, couldn't. So, and the other thing is that our daughter, she grew up kind of like scared of him, because she was kind of freaked out about, why does grandpa have no legs, and what's going on with him. But eventually they developed a very strong and close knit bond. And they were very close. My father survived 8 years after this happened. He eventually passed away a couple of years ago. But I can tell you, Sean, that what I learned from this, there's so many things I learned from this, and it affected me greatly, but is that, illness is not just illness. It has tremendous ripple effects across not only the individual. I mean, my father became very severely depressed. It affected him financially. He lost his job. He lost his income. But the depression and the everything to do with the quality of life, it impacts the whole family negatively. And so we all kind of became depressed together collectively, and it altered again the future trajectory of our family, and it affected our grandchildren. And so anyway, I think I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure you understand this, but I think a lot of times as clinicians, we see illness as illness. We look at numbers. Here's your A1C. Here's your blood pressure. We look at medications, and we don't realize what illness really does to people. And we don't, I think as clinicians too, again, we have a relative lack of nutrition education in our training. And we don't realize that, medications, they do a great job to reduce risk, to slow down disease. But for the most part, they don't really prevent disease, obviously, and they don't really reverse disease. So the disease process continues. And in the case of my father, his habits never really improved. His lifestyle never really improved. So this had a tremendous effect on me. But even though it had a tremendous effect on me, I still didn't know much about nutrition. And I was fearing for my own life too, because I was following his footsteps at more or less at the time that you see this picture here, Sean. I already was about 255 pounds, which is a BMI of about 33. I had prediabetes. I had daily acid reflux, GERD. I had fatty liver. I was worried that I was literally following in his footsteps, and that I was a ticking time bomb. And my father, I mentioned, had a heart attack at age 45. So I was approaching that age. And so in any case, I kind of by coincidence, it wasn't really coincidence, well, 100%, but not through medicine, actually, not through my medical training, not through, my workplace, but through friends and family. A book was recommended, a book on plant-based nutrition. And my wife actually was the one who started reading it, and she introduced it to me. And I was very hesitant in the beginning, Sean, because I'd always thought that when people make claims that, I don't know how disease can be reversed and all that, I go, oh, this sounds like quack medicine, but the more I listened, initially, what's that?
What was the book?
It was actually Dr. Furman's book, Eat to Live. And, I was so intrigued though, even though, again, as I mentioned, my first initial reaction was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, this doctor sounds like a quack. But the more he spoke, and I say spoke because we first listened to it as an audiobook driving home one day from a trip, I started hearing things like, the more greens you eat, the more weight you lose, the healthier you get. And this was the first time in my entire life, Sean, where I heard that the more of something you eat, the healthier you get, the more weight you lose. We always hear you have to restrict, you have to eat less food, eat less calories. So I was really intrigued by this message, and it made a lot of sense to me. It made a lot of common sense, greens. I mean, of course, yeah, the more greens you eat, they're less calorie dense and they're very nutritious. So, and I learned this concept that, it's not really how much we eat, it's what we eat. And I started to realize that actually we can eat more food, or at least we don't have to count and measure and restrict. But by eating the right foods, we can actually lose weight pretty easily once we have the right information. And in fact, he made the claim in the book that you can lose significant amount of weight even if you don't exercise. I said, no way, you have to exercise to lose weight. That's what I've always, you have to eat less and you have to exercise to lose weight. And so I challenged myself to start adopting a plant-based diet based on what I learned from this book. Initially, not 100% plant-based. I first of all, I didn't, in the book, I don't know, for those of you who may have read it or curious, he doesn't actually recommend or quote unquote require, people to go. He says you don't need to be 100% to get benefits, to reach your goals, basically. But it's kind of like the more you go in this direction, the better your results will be. It's up to you to decide how far you want to go. So I initially kind of was starting out maybe 80-90% plant-based, but I couldn't believe myself, Sean, because intentionally I wanted to disprove his theory that you could lose weight without exercising. So for the first month, I did not exercise. Actually, to be honest with you, I continued that. I mean, I lost 17 pounds in the first month. Now I know some of it is maybe water weight, but I don't think it was 17 pounds of water weight, because over the months that followed, I lost 75 pounds in 8 months. And I actually, I did very little exercise just to kind of see, like, how far can this actually go? And eventually I started exercising towards the very end, but this was after I'd really lost the majority of the weight. And so it blew my mind, because again, I was not counting, not measuring anything, not tracking anything, Sean, not literally nothing, eating until I was full. In fact, many times I couldn't believe how stuffed I was and how satisfied I was. The only thing I will mention, I'm probably making it sound too good to be true. And I'm probably, if I'm guilty of that, I'm guilty. Yeah, so be it. But I'll be honest with you, the challenge, there's always a catch to everything. The challenge was that when you're so used to these ultra processed foods, and I really was, you don't realize how addictive they are until you try and give them up. And so for the first few weeks, I did have some cravings. I did feel kind of like, I don't know how to explain it, but I didn't quite feel right. And I didn't realize that probably what I was going through is kind of like a withdrawal and cravings kind of situation, probably analogous to what I don't know what it's like to give up smoking. I've never been a smoker. But I can imagine, when people go through substance, withdrawal, for whatever it may be, they don't quite feel right in the beginning. There's all kinds of symptoms that people describe. But so I didn't feel quite right, but I was losing weight, and I realized that I started, as the weeks went by, I felt better and better and better, stronger and stronger, lighter, more energy. And again, and the cravings that I had, because, initially I would have all these cravings for the things that I was giving up. But eventually most of those cravings subsided, and I couldn't believe that, wow. I said, I've always heard people say before that, oh, when you eat healthy, your taste buds change and you can get. And I said, I don't know. I don't buy that, because every time I tried to eat something, healthy food in the past, I didn't. The thing is, I didn't give it enough time. That's the thing, is a lot of times people eat healthy for a couple of days and they might not like it, but they don't realize that sometimes it takes a few weeks. And I also learned a lot of tricks to make healthy food tastes delicious. I always share this joke that, the more I love hot sauce, I love spicy food. I don't know about you, Sean. And I make this joke that, the more hot sauce you put on something, sometimes you don't even know what it is you're eating because you could mask. So I put so much spices and seasonings in my food and I love it. And the thing is too, is that I realized that as you make this change, you start to really appreciate the subtle flavors of foods that you didn't maybe appreciate before, because I think all that sugar, fat, and salt really dulls your senses. You just get used to that. You get used to the sugar, fat, and salt. You don't realize that there's cilantro in something, or there's ginger in something, there's basil. And so once you kind of take away the mask of all that sugar, fat, and salt, those herbs and spices really are powerful, and start to really appreciate them. And I couldn't believe what I was going through, Sean. I was like, wow, this is like a spiritual awakening, so to speak. And I just realized that, my whole life, Sean, I was led to believe that genetically, because there's so much chronic disease in my family on both sides, I was led to believe that we were genetically weak or inferior, that we had genetic defects. And then I was also led to believe, Sean, because I wasn't good, quote unquote, good at portion control and moderation, that there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, that I was weak, that I had low willpower, and so I had this low self-esteem for many years, not realizing that, oh my goodness, because I should mention, I lost the weight, but I also lost the prediabetes, the fatty liver went away, the acid reflux. I became, quote unquote, a healthy, normal person. Whatever that means to you. But the point is, I didn't have all these conditions anymore, and I didn't have the extra weight. And so what I realized is that I'm not weak. I'm not broken. I don't have weak willpower. It's that I was given the wrong information. I don't think there was any malintent in those giving me this information. But I realized that when we eat healthy foods, natural foods, especially whole plant foods, they don't need to be restricted. In fact, restricting is not in fact, we look at the animal kingdom, all the wild animals, they don't count, they don't measure, they don't starve themselves. They may starve themselves if they don't, if they're famished, they don't have enough access to food, but they're healthy. They have a healthy weight, and they eat freely from the land. And so I realized too that our genetic, there's an expression, I'm sure you've heard this before, Sean, that genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Mm-hmm. I really believe that. And I know obviously genetics can be, for some people, it can be more of a factor than for others. We're all different, of course, but I realize that in most cases, genetics can be overcome, at least to a significant degree. And I've seen that with my patients too. So it's kind of a long-winded story, but
right.
I hope there's something. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up genetics. So when they've done twin studies and they've looked at how long people live, what they've found repeatedly in different populations, there's a Swedish study, there's a Finnish study, what they showed was genetics is about 20 to 30% of your longevity. That's where it ends. The other portion, that's about 70 to 80%, is exactly what you're describing as environment. And what's interesting about the book, Eat to Live, when the book was written, and I read the book and I loved the book, when it was actually published, there weren't the randomized clinical trials to show the benefits that you're alluding to. What's interesting is we have those randomized clinical trials now. So what you're describing with a whole foods plant-based diet is this actually came out of Neil Barnard's group, and what they showed was if you follow a whole foods plant-based diet, number one, you don't have to restrict calories. Number two, what they found was that the people who were following that diet and were allowed to eat anything they wanted, they actually ate on average 500 to 700 calories less per day. Right. That alone wasn't enough to account for the weight loss. But because those whole grains, those legumes, and those fruits and veggies in there, they're rich in fibers, the thermic effect of food was also revved up quite significantly. So your experience without exercise, eating a whole food plant-based diet, which is essentially nutrient dense, calorie poor, allows you to be able to cut your calories down and not have a change in hunger. So there's an entire scientific explanation to what you experience, where we now have randomized studies for.
Yes, absolutely. And the way I explain it I appreciate that. And you're right. I mean, the studies that seem to be coming out now are confirming some of the things that were strongly suspected, or where they were implied that this was the case, but we didn't have we were having more and more data to back up what we what some of these claims have been. But also there, of course, there's limitations, as you know, to the observational studies and so forth. But the other thing too, and what I explain to my patients too, in a simple way, is that whole plant foods are rich in fiber and water. You mentioned the fiber and the water too. And actually, people might think, so what, water? I mean, but the thing is that in terms of like the volumetrics concept, our stomachs are only a certain size. And when you fill up with a lot of fiber and a lot of water, as you mentioned, that's the fiber and water, they have no calories. They take up space. They're bulky. They're heavy. And so essentially you're filling up your stomach with these whole plant foods with less calories because of all the fiber and water. And there's, only so much room in there. And so that's calorie density. It's the kind of calories per pound. I know you know all this, Sean, but that I find is a helpful way for people to simply, to understand this in a simple fashion. And so I explain to people, it's better to have whole natural foods as opposed to crackers, cookies, and chips, because they're dry. And not only that, they're highly processed and higher in fat and sugar, which make them more calorie dense as well. But especially the fat, because fat's more calorically dense than carbohydrate, as you know. But so yeah, no, it's there's so much science that, and to me, a lot of it, in hindsight, it's common sense. I mean, some of this is common sense. It's fantastic to have all the science behind it, but when I see pictures of like, and I'm sure you've seen this. I don't have one to show right this moment, but you can see a stomach that's full of whole plant foods, and it's 400 calories of whole plant foods versus a stomach that has maybe oil in it or maybe beef in it, and it's because they're so calorically dense. It doesn't fill up as much of the stomach nearly as whole plant food. So I mean, that's a visual. I'm a visual person too. So anyway, as I was going through my own transformation, Sean, as a primary care physician, I just realized, oh my goodness, 80%, give or take, of what I see in my daily practice are the very conditions that can be prevented and or reversed with this kind of a lifestyle change. And so most of the suffering I'm seeing day in and day out, all day long, is preventable, reversible with simple changes. I mean, granted, I say simple, I'm not trying to downplay the fact that this can be very challenging for people to adopt. However, I mean, on paper, it's very simple. And I just see people suffering for years and years, just like my dad, for so many years. I can only imagine the life that my dad would have had he known all this years and years ago, and how much better his life would have been, and how it would have, so the trajectory of our lives is really altered so much. So I started implementing this in my practice, but teaching this to my patients. But I initially, I became very frustrated at the same time, because as you know, in medicine, we don't have a lot of time with patients, generally have about 20 minutes per patient, depending on, where we practice and so forth. And I realized it's just not enough time to really counsel patients, really give them all the education and tools they need. So a lot of times I would refer patients to read a book, to maybe watch something, a documentary or something, just to get them started. And some patients would take that advice and they'd run with it and they do really well. But for the most part, I realized that so many patients were not, either I was limited with the time, or they weren't following through on what I was recommending that they do. And so I realized that, what, and the other thing that was happening, Sean, was I was spending, in some cases, I was literally spending an hour with some patients and finding myself so behind schedule that I was getting patients really upset with me. They said, "Doctor, I've been waiting like almost 2 hours. What's going on?" And I go, "Okay, this is not sustainable." I mean, on one hand, I don't think that obesity and chronic disease is sustainable. I actually, not to get off topic, I call the obesity and chronic disease the real pandemic, not to minimize the COVID pandemic. But as we all know, first of all, obesity and chronic disease, approximately 1.8 million Americans die every year from those conditions, which is about 5,000 per day, far more than COVID deaths. But when it comes to COVID deaths, 90% of COVID deaths are in people with the same chronic condition. So obesity and chronic disease, really the main underlying pandemic, which is mostly lifestyle. So the point is that I kind of knew that I didn't know what COVID was years ago. None of us did, but I knew that this was the main problem that people were having. This was the main issue. And so it was driving me crazy. What can I do? And so that's when I, along with the nurse practitioner, she became inspired. Her name is Maureen. She became inspired by what I was doing in my own personal transformation. Some other colleagues in my medical center were becoming inspired by by my personal transformation and what I was sharing with the information I was sharing with them. And so I got the support to start a group program where we taught this information in a way that that made sense to us, because we realized that obviously science, as you know, Sean, can be overwhelming to people. People don't like too much statistics and numbers. They want it practical. And so we taught them, what we know from the way our perspective, and the nurse practitioner had her own personal transformation. So we tried to be good examples to these patients and help them. And we said, look, we're all in this together. We sort of started as a small group kind of project. And I was very fortunate that I was given time, to do this. And so rather than having 20 minutes only with one patient, I now had 2 hours with 20 patients. And so it was much more optimal for this kind of a endeavor. And we got amazing results from it. And, I've never seen patients before get off insulin. The only patients I've seen get off insulin in the past were people who had bariatric surgery. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing patients get off insulin, off blood pressure medications. I have seen, when you hear that heart disease can be reversed, you go, no, that can't be true. It sounds like, again, quackery, but I've actually seen that as well. We had a patient, I can share some, I do have some, if you'd like, I can share some of these stories. Some of them are just so incredible.
I can your favorite story. If you have one that you think.
Oh my goodness, that's so hard. There's so many, but I can share the first one here. It's so hard to pick one, but this was Janet, and this story. Well, I'll just share it, and I'll add a little commentary at the end. But Janet, as you can see, Sean is in a scooter here. She has an oxygen tubing here. She has COPD from, she was a former smoker. She could barely walk across a room, kind of poor quality of life, but had a great she was, had a great personality. You can see her smiling in the picture. So she was not really a negative person, so to speak. She tried to remain positive, but she wasn't very happy with this quality of life. And I think most people, when they see somebody like this, see somebody like Janet, they think, oh, poor Janet. But I think for the most part, we all think that she's kind of stuck this way. And I think most of us probably think that, well, the only way she could get out of a situation like this is maybe bariatric surgery. But of course, there's risks involved, and she's older, and she's a former smoker. Would she be a good candidate for that? But she started to eat this way. And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but I know this sounds like a little corny, but I refer to this way of eating sometimes as the magical buffet, because, in a buffet, it's all you can eat. We love buffets, but when you eat in a buffet, you tend to gain weight. At least in the typical buffet in the United States, you tend to gain weight. You tend to get sicker and sicker. Whereas this way, with these whole plant foods, you actually lose weight and you get healthier and healthier. So she ate from the magical buffet, and she can't really exercise much, you can see. So this was not from exercise, but she lost a lot of weight, and you can see her standing here, and in less than a year, she lost, I think it was 84 pounds. But the most impressive thing to me was this was about not only weight loss, but quality of life. She no longer needed her oxygen. She no longer needed her walker or her scooter. She literally walks, she says, all over the place. That's her quote. And she also was quoted telling us that she feels 25 years younger. So this, essentially, she got the benefits, Sean, of weight loss surgery without having had the surgery. And she feels fantastic, and she feels free. She can eat as much as she wants, and she can live such a higher quality of life. And here she is. I actually have a video of her, but I think this is just a screenshot of her dancing in a karaoke. This is pre-COVID. You can't, maybe you can't do this these days, but she was actually dancing in a karaoke bar like a teenager, and she couldn't do that before. And anyway, that's her story. I don't know whether normally I continue with this because there's one more chapter to this, but she has a daughter, if you don't mind. She has a daughter named Kim, and Kim actually, this is Kim. Let me see, I have a little extra thing here. Kim actually had weight loss surgery and gained most of the weight back. And this is her after having gained most of the weight back, but this is her daughter, Kim. And so a lot of times what's beautiful about nutrition and lifestyle is that unlike medications, again, nothing against medications, but, and this sounds, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, Sean, but when we prescribe pills, let's say a blood pressure pill, that helps lower the blood pressure of that individual patient. It does absolutely nothing to their family. So, but when we teach lifestyle and promote it, that can spread that can be contagious. The benefits can be contagious. So this is Janet's daughter, Kim. Anyway, Kim ended up gaining most of the weight back from the bariatric surgery. A lot of it, actually, not all of it, to be honest, but she had a lot of fatigue issues with fatigue, sciatica, and high blood pressure. And essentially all those problems went away. Here she is after going plant-based, eating from the magical buffet. And the idea is that we have so many patients who have either, first of all, maybe they felt that weight loss surgery was the only option for them, or they've had weight loss surgery, but they felt frustrated that they've gained a lot of the weight back, and they might feel like, oh, there's nothing else I can do. And I just love the fact that there is this option. And we've had many patients in our program either avoid weight loss surgery or have had it and have gained the weight back, and they've had success with this. And I know you said one story, and that's fine. But I've had so many. We had a patient who was going to have heart bypass surgery because of angina, and the angina went away. We had one patient 2 years ago who was diagnosed with diabetes, and his A1C was 12.4, and he was put on insulin. And 2 months later, he's off the insulin, and his A1C comes down eventually to 5.1 with no medications, which is essentially, we don't like to say cure. That's not, but he essentially put his diabetes into complete remission. And these are stories I would have never dreamed of before, Sean. I would hear these stories in Eat to Live, and I said, this is too good to be true. This guy's a quack. And I can't believe that these things actually can happen. Now, obviously, and I share this with my patients, I can't guarantee, of course, none of us can guarantee that these are going to be, that everybody's going to be cured of every disease, that everybody's going to lose 100 pounds. Of course not. But, and I think for the most part, the longer people have disease, the harder it is to reverse. So the earlier you intervene, the better. But the other thing too, I think, is, and this is an unfortunate reality, is that some patients do really struggle with making these changes. We're living in a society that makes it very challenging. There's so much temptation. There's so much, and we're social creatures. We're tribal. We don't want to be different. We want to eat like our family. We want to eat like our friends. But what I found is that if we build communities of support, if patients, first of all, if they can get support within their family, it makes it so much easier. I was fortunate to have support from my wife, which made all the difference in the world. But we try to, with our program, Sean, we, as much as possible, try to create like a family type environment where people get to know each other a little bit, and so they don't feel alone. I think that's so important, is the social aspect of lifestyle change, because again, I think I have seen many patients relapse. I'm being honest, and the relapse typically started off as something social. They go to a party, or they hanging out with their friends, or they go out to eat with their friends. This is again pre-COVID, and they want to eat like them. They don't want to be different. People don't. So I don't know, but I hope what I'm sharing is helpful. I probably am too long-winded. I'm not giving you much a chance to ask me questions. So let me turn it back to you.
Let me ask you, Steve. So, a lot of people, when they're watching, whether it's these interviews or others, they're wondering, there's so many things that make it hard for them to take that first step. So I always ask any guest that I have is, where do people start? If somebody's watching this, they don't have access to a healthcare team that understands this philosophy, or, their social determinants of health, or cost are an issue, whatever. Where do you tell people as the first steps they can take to get started in this journey?
Absolutely, Sean. Well, I think the first step is obviously getting the knowledge, the information. And so, because, without the right knowledge and information, that's, you're not going to be, you need that to guide you. So obviously that's number one. And there's many ways to get the right information. And, that was the impetus, for us to start our classes, our program is to give them the information from our perspective that we felt was most important. So that's number one. And number two, I think, and I share this with my patients, it's really important to clean out your kitchen. When I say clean it out, I don't mean like dust it. I mean, get rid of all the quote unquote junk, because there's an expression, actually, Chef AJ, who you know, Sean, she has an expression. I'm going to give her credit. If it's in your house, it's in your mouth. Maybe you've heard that before. It's so true. These ultra processed foods, they call our name. And I think we are naturally, I think we're wired to go for the low hanging fruit and to go for the calorie dense foods. For survival reasons. I think our brain, the pleasure centers in our brain, the dopamine, it rewards us. So clean it out. I make a joke. I'm not trying to be too sarcastic. I say, donate it or give it to somebody else. Let them be sick. I mean, that's obviously I'm being sarcastic, but we don't want other people to get sick. But the point is, not to waste food. If you want to donate it, fine. So if it's out of your house, then the next step is to fill up your home, your kitchen, with only healthy food, natural whole plant foods, whatever you decide to do. And then, I share with people, if you're on an island where there's only healthy food, you can't fail. You cannot fail unless you escape the island. So create that island around you in your own home. And then socially, you have to be very aware. You always have to be one step ahead. What I mean by that is, if you're going to a party or a social function and you're not quite sure what they're going to be serving, what you don't want to do is show up there on an empty stomach, because when your stomach is empty, you're more tempted. I've done that before, made the mistake, but you learn from your mistakes. So there are times, Sean, where I will actually eat a full meal before I go somewhere so that I'm not tempted. Also, even going to the grocery store on a full stomach is because if you're prone to cravings, I want this, I want that, you're going to grab things and regret it later. The other thing that I think is very important psychologically, because that's a big factor, is my advice to people is make a list of 3 things. One is your why. That's your emotional reason for why. And your why is not, I want to lose weight. That's a goal. That's not your why. Your why, it might be, for example, your children, your grandchildren, maybe your love of life, your passions, your joy out of life, emotional reason. Your why is the thing that makes you cry, and we have to know what that is and remind ourselves, especially in our modern society, because there's going to be so much temptation. We need to have that drive. And then a list of your goals as specific as possible. Maybe it's, I want to have a good A1C. I want to have an A1C less than 7, whatever it is, specific goals. I want to get off this medication. And now granted, we may not always achieve them, but if we know what they are and they're specific, we'll be more motivated. And then the final one is a list of action steps, because a lot of times we might say, oh yeah, I want to eat healthy and I want to lose this much weight. I want to get my A1C done. But what are the steps you're going to take? For example, clean out your kitchen, shopping. So the more specific we are across all 3 of these categories, and the more we remind ourselves, I recommend people make these 3 things very visible in their life. Some people talk about what's called a vision board. Maybe you've heard of that, Sean, but maybe make a board at home that you can see, or put it on your smartphone or something. Make a habit of looking at it. Maybe put it in your bathroom, look at it every day. So those are some tips to get started and finally get support. I mean, however it may be, whether it's a group program through wherever you're getting your medical care, whether it's online, there's so much support online through social media. So that was a long answer. Again, I have got probably too much to.
No, I love it. When you talk about support, what are some things that you do? So, you talked about, in your particular case, your wife being very supportive. How do you get other people in your family to sort of buy into this? Or, even if they can't meet you at 100%, maybe they can meet you at 10%. What are some strategies you tell your patients?
Oh, that's such a great question. Because honestly, Sean, I would say this is probably the number one obstacle people have. I mean, first, obviously, getting the right information and getting those 3 things I mentioned, the why, the goals, the action steps. But the big problem, biggest obstacle is family, I think. And to be honest with you, my joke, and again, it's not really a joke, is that family are harder to get to change than patients. In other words, but I haven't had as much success with family getting them to change. However, like you said, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be 100%. What I have been successful at getting is a lot of respect from my family and support, as far as when we get together in our family. First of all, they understand. So, well, I think your question was like, how do you get patients to So there's so many steps. I recommend people start very gently, start gently and gradually build up a little bit. So gentle could be, let's read a book together. Let's watch a documentary together. Let's look at this website together. Let's share information. And let's try some foods together. Let's do, gentle, and actually sometimes there are some people literally, if the food tastes good, that's all they care about. So they don't want to hear any science. They don't want to hear anything medical, but they just care. Does it taste good? And are you going to cook for me? Like what's in it for me? And, that kind of thing. So we sort of have to know our audience, so to speak, and know what works for them. And then so there's that. And then I would say too, that sometimes negotiating, I think you mentioned that, maybe you're not willing to go all the way like I am, but are we willing to give up soda in the house? Are we willing to give up chips in the house? Or and you could say, look, okay, maybe we don't have them in the house. If you want to eat them outside, go for it. Just like, for example, smokers, you can smoke outside, just don't smoke in the house. So we can negotiate. And I've also told people that if you really truly feel that you've tried everything and you're desperate and you go, oh my gosh, then I say you might want to pull out kind of like an emotional plea to them and say, look, I really feel for me that this is potentially life or death for me, because I've actually seen it. I know this, again, I'm preaching to the choir, Sean, with you, but I've literally seen people where I've had conversations with them about this, and 2 weeks later, they're dead. And they're dead because they had a heart attack or they had a fatal stroke. And I feel so terrible because in hindsight, I know that we had these conversations and that there was some obstacle. So sometimes that works for some families, an emotional plea. Or maybe somebody, as you're a nephrologist, Sean, maybe somebody has chronic kidney disease and say, I really don't want to go on dialysis. Do you want mommy to go on dialysis? Do you want your dad to go on dialysis? Whatever it is. This is so important to me. Or do you want your father to lose his leg? I've already have neuropathy in my feet. And, I've actually shared with my patient, I said, look, if you want to take my dad's foot or feet and put those pictures, share them with your family, do that. Because sometimes so I hope that answers the question. I mean, there's, again,
it does.
Long answer.
The next question, which is, a natural sort of follow-up to the first one is, so what happens when people fall down? How do you sort of help them through it? Because part of nutrition and part of obesity and part of chronic diseases is shame. And it's one of those topics we never talk about. I've never met somebody who had extra weight that they didn't realize they had extra weight. All those things they've gone through already, and yet we shame them for it. So when they actually don't succeed, they're so afraid to bring it up, especially to their healthcare provider. So how do you help people to deal with the falls?
Excellent question, because on that, again, you know where the money is, so to speak. You know where the money is. Well, first of all, it happens a lot. You're right. And people do feel shame. And I think what I try and share with patients is I say, look, you're human. We're living in a society where this is very hard, and making them feel like they're not alone. You're not alone. This happens to a lot of people. Just like with smoking, the average person who's a smoker, it takes several attempts to quit, and kind of normalizing it so say, look, this is normal. People fall down. It's okay. Don't feel bad. Give them a pat on the back or whatever it is. Maybe we don't do that anymore with COVID, but give them an elbow or something and say, it's okay. You're going to get through this. And try to make it a learning experience and a healing experience, and kind of like reflect back. Okay, what was working when things were going well? Why were things going well? And then how did this happen? How did this evolve? And how, if we were to kind of go back in time, how can we replay all this? And what would we have changed? How can we? And so going forward, and I always share with them too, I say, what? Our bodies are amazing. They forgive us most of the time. So if you didn't die from this relapse, you can start fresh. And, just like people with diabetes, we see that their A1C shoots up because they weren't doing so well, but we can see that a few months later, it's back down. And so our bodies are forgiving. And so basically, take a fresh start and really try and learn. I think I shared with you just a moment ago that this is just a small thing, but I share this with my patients. I say, look, I'm human too. and I think also that empathy. I'm human too. These things have happened to me, and but I always share with my patients that I went to a kid's birthday. This is just one episode, but I went to a kid's birthday party on a completely empty stomach, and kids' birthday parties are notorious for serving, junk food. And I gave in to some of it, and I felt awful. I felt shameful. I felt guilty. And this was just one day, but I've had other times where it was more than just one day where I was having a string of like, what am I doing? And so even, during the pandemic, I've had some days where I haven't been at my best. I may have even put a few pounds on, but I realized that, okay, why is this happening? What's going on? And how can I learn from this going forward? And what can I change? And normalizing it, empathy and support, and say, and as a provider, how can I support you going forward? And or what resources, or, connecting people. I think we've had people in our program, Sean, who actually have shared with it, Alcoholics Anonymous is lifelong for many people. And the reason it's lifelong is we're never finished. This is a journey. And that's the other thing. This is a journey. And trying to help, actually, for our program, Sean, initially our program was just like, okay, 3 months, you're done. It's the 3-month program. But what we found was that because the relapse rate was much higher than we anticipated, and because people were demanding, like, why did you stop this program? You cut us off, and it's your fault and so we decided, okay, we're going to leave it open. We're going to have new people come in, but if the old timers or graduates want to stay, you can stay. And actually, we realized that was a big benefit, because those who stayed, it not only helped them to kind of remain accountable and continue to get the support, but they actually started to act as mentors to the new people. So we actually kind of created this sense of community, much like AA. Like AA, you have sponsors and kind of this sense of community. So we realized that community and support is so important. And so, that's kind of a long answer too, but I have a lot of thoughts on all of this. So I hope this is helpful. Yeah.
In that regards, I think one of the things that we all go through and we all suffer from, and I'm probably in that boat with everybody, is we are our toughest critic. And so when we talk to ourselves internally, we don't do a lot of, hey, Sean, you're awesome. You did such a great job this morning. It's about, wow, you didn't work out this morning. That's terrible. Why did you give in and eat that? All of those things that we end up doing, that negative self-talk, it's so crazy. And you bring up the word empathy. We learn to show empathy towards others. But this idea of being able to love ourselves, accept ourselves, show compassion to ourselves, and realize that we, as humans, are bound to make mistakes. It's such an interesting concept. And I tell you, there's very few people I've met that have truly mastered this concept. Me, I have definitely not mastered it. And one of the beauties of interviewing guys like yourself is I learn from every interview. And it's almost like I'm able to take that and make myself better from it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I feel the same way. And the other thing I realized too, Sean, in terms of the sense of community, I mean, you're familiar, of course, with the blue zones. And, in the blue zones, I think, I've not lived in one, of course, but I can imagine that when your culture is a very healthy culture, there's no such thing as a relapse, because you're just living. It's a lifestyle. It's a culture. I think so. One of the biggest challenges is that we're not living in that healthy culture here. So we're trying to motivate people, inspire people to basically live a blue zone life in a non-blue zone culture, which is very difficult, because in the blue zone culture, there's no struggle, there's no relapse, because it's just the norm. And so, but I think the more that we can start on a grassroots level to change the culture, one individual, because, what I've realized, Sean, this is so rewarding as a physician, is that when I see one patient change their lifestyle, it's so rewarding. But when I see that they then share it with other friends and family, I realize, oh my gosh, this is so incredible, because I feel like this is contagious, and it makes me feel that, again, there's no greater joy I've had. Don't get me wrong, I love our profession, but there's no greater joy and reward than helping people with their lifestyle, especially when you see that you're not only influencing one person in the family, but sometimes several, and friends. And so that's how we're going to change the world. We have to start with individuals and families and communities. And I've been, the other thing, again, I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but when you turn on the TV, which I try to minimize my own TV watching, but I'm so disgusted. I'm just being honest. I'm disgusted by commercial after commercial on TV. It's either fast food or medication, fast food, medication, fast food, medication, and that's become kind of the mainstream American culture. Is just we eat this way and we get sick and we need pills, and we don't, obviously, it's a free country, it's capitalism, I get that, I respect it, I'm not trying to say that we should change that, but the way that we improved smoking in this country was not just from counseling patients. It was a systematic effort on all levels of our society, and I just feel like we need to do the same with food. I'm not saying that we need to. I'm not a politician. But I don't have all the answers. But I really feel that we need to give it the attention it deserves on all levels of society, not just in the medical office, because when they leave the medical office, they're in the real world. And so I'm sure you can relate to what I'm saying. And
yes,
but
right.
It'll be so much easier. Yeah.
Final question, and that's the hardest question I always ask everybody is, so bringing it all together, what are Dr. Lawenda's top 3 or 4 tips that you want to leave the audience with that they can do? And they could be anything, but hardest question I ask every single person.
Would you, and just to be clear, and this question, which is a tough question, yes, and you put me on the spot, but that's good. I like that. Should I gear this towards more like clinical people or patients?
Whatever you like. Whatever you like. We have a diverse audience, so you pick.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I might have already shared them with. I think I may have already shared them, but maybe it's okay if it's all right with you. I mean, I'll just kind of highlight them. You said 3, so let me count. But
give me 4. It's fine.
4, yeah. I mean, well, I mean, I already shared the one about your why, your goals, and action. Just being specific and reminding yourself, especially in our culture, because of your why, your goals, your action steps. Because Sean, you know this. I mean, so many people say, yeah, I want to live better. I want to be healthier. That's too vague. We need specifics. And it's not going to work. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some people, maybe that works for them, but so be specific. So that's number 1.
I like
and number 2, educate yourself as well as you can, because, and it's tough, of course, as we talk about this all the time. Diet is such a passionate topic, but the point is that prepare yourself. If it's a whole foods plant-based diet, which of course we both agree is a very healthy way to go. If it's something modified or something else, whatever it is, have the knowledge. And then I mentioned this one also earlier, is your environment. Prepare your environment. Pretend that, I call that the island or magical. It's not really magical, but if you're on an island where there's only healthy food, you're not going to fail. So create that environment. Create a very healthy environment as much as possible. Of course, family can be an obstacle. We talked about that, but that's a whole separate issue. But do it the best you can to create your environment. Not only includes your home, but it includes your social environment, which means a lot of times, this could be my 4th, would be to always, as much as possible, plan ahead. There's an expression, failing to plan is planning to fail, something like that. But the point is because we live in that society where the default culture is an unhealthy one, if you don't plan ahead, you will oftentimes encounter yourself in a situation where you're tempted or surrounded by unhealthy food. And so that planning ahead could be batch cooking, preparing meals ahead of time, so that when it's a busy day like today. What is today? Thursday. So today, Thursday. Yes. I'm always a day off. It's a busy life we have. But I don't have to worry about where's my healthy food going to come from, because I've prepared something earlier. Maybe I made a big batch of soup and I've put that away in the freezer, right? So it's ready to go. When you batch cook, that becomes fast food as the week goes on, the other thing, just real quick on fast food, a lot of people think, but fast food's so convenient. I mean, that's why I go to the drive-thru. I always share, look, the animals, everything they eat is fast food. I mean, it's all fast. The healthiest foods are fast. When you pick up our fast foods, when you pick up an apple, that's fast food. Most of the foods we're talking about, whole plant foods, are very fast to prepare or eat. Most of them raw. Even a little bit of light cooking, steaming, sauteing is fast. So anyway, but I think the reason people eat fast food is more than convenience. It's the addiction is a big part. But anyway, but planning ahead, and like I said, with social situations, if you need to eat ahead or even call ahead, ask what's going to be served, or if it's a friend's house, again, with COVID aside, can I bring something? Ask them if you can bring something. And if you're plant-based and you bring something, always bring double the amount, because chances are people will love it. And then if they eat all your food, you have nothing left. So those are my tips.
Well, those are fantastic tips. Dr. Lawenda, I want to thank you. You are a friend. You are a scholar. You're doing amazing work for everybody. This has truly been an honor to have you on. And folks, we will definitely have links to how to contact Dr. Lawenda, his programs, his information. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. And we will definitely be back with another interview, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sean.